G20 foreign ministers have wrapped up their meeting in New Delhi. Deep divisions emerging over the conflict in Ukraine with no joint communique being issued. We can now go across to Suhasini Haider, diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program today. Now, Ukraine was always going to feature in these talks, but India didn't want the conflict to dominate the agenda, but it sort of did because we didn't have this joint communique released.
That's correct. And India has been trying to forge a joint communique for the past few days, even though it knew it was a very difficult task. From what we understand, eventually there were two paragraphs dealing with Ukraine, and they were not able to get the Russian and Chinese side to come on board with them. Primarily, this was because they attempted to basically reproduce the Bali document that had been agreed to at the G20 in Bali last November. However, Russia is now holding that the scenario has changed, holding out the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion as something that must be included in the discussions, also speaking about the fact that the Minsk agreements were never intended to be implemented by European countries. So using all of those in their argument to say that we can no longer be okay with what was written in the Bali document. So in a sense, as whole, the Indian position has become a little more difficult because in the next few months, they're going to have to do a lot more heavy lifting to get a joint statement at the Leaders Summit, which is actually the key, and that's in September this year.
The last time you and I spoke, Suhasini, was in September. You were covering a summit in Uzbekistan. That very day, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi told Vladimir Putin to his face that now is not the time for war. But since then, we have seen India continue to purchase Russian oil. We've seen India continue to abstain when it comes to resolutions concerning Ukraine at the UN, United Nations. How is it that India has been able to do all of that without ruffling feathers in the West?
Well, I think India has walked a tightrope balance, and particularly with the West, that does not seem to want to open another front, particularly given the huge tensions with Russia and the increasing tensions and the larger tensions, if you like, with China. It is fairly clear that India is not a country the West wants to open a flank with. The statement to Putin that the war, this era is not of war, has been played up very much, obviously, by Western countries as a kind of rebuke to Putin. In fact, there were many reasons to assume that it was not just meant for Putin. And in the months that have followed, certainly it doesn't seem as if Mr. Putin got whatever message was sent to him. In fact, as you pointed out, India's oil purchases have increased, but India feels that that is its sovereign right, and the U.S. has in the meanwhile changed its position, saying that it's okay to buy Russian oil so long as it's below the price cap of $60. But what it has meant is that India's purchases of oil have gone up in the last year now from 40,000 barrels per day to 1.27 or even more million barrels per day. And Russia is now not only India's biggest supplier, India is Russia's biggest purchaser of oil. So clearly India has tried to keep these tracks separate. And as you pointed out, at the UN is keeping a balanced approach in terms of abstaining from every vote at the UNGA that seeks to criticize Russia.
Last Friday, China came out with a 12-point peace plan. It's been criticized by the West because it doesn't call for Russian troops to leave Ukraine. However, it's not been criticized by Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky. He, in fact, wants to meet Xi Jinping to discuss this plan further. What has Delhi's reaction been to this plan?
Well, so far we have asked Delhi, and we asked the Foreign Secretary yesterday about what the reaction to the Chinese pitch was, and his answer was that it really is for the Chinese to explain what their position is, and India is not the party to have to respond. Mr. Qin Gang, who came to Delhi for the G20 foreign ministers meeting, actually also referred to his peace plan during his initial remarks made at the foreign ministers meeting. But it doesn't seem to have gone very far because the joint outcome statement clearly mentions that Russia and China were not on board with the language of the summary document, and that was the reason why they could not forge a joint statement.
Now, Suhasini, along with G20 foreign ministers, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is in the Indian capital. She said India could play a central role in bringing about peace in Ukraine, given that India, like China, has not come out and outright condemned Moscow for its invasion. Would that be a role that would interest India?
Well, I think India has always said it, and Prime Minister Modi said it a few days ago as well, that he was keen to play whatever role he could to bring peace to the conflict in Europe. However, we have seen in the past when India had offered a mediatory role, Mr. Zelensky saying that he did not at the moment see any point in speaking with Mr. Putin. And it is well known that given the status quo situation with Russian troops in a large part of Ukraine, or at least one-fifth they claim, or however much of it is, that it is not in Ukraine's benefit to go for a peace proposal at the moment. That's why it wasn't mentioned in the Western proposal at the UNGA either. So the fact is that India would like to wait and see where it can play a constructive role. And I think the government has said again and again, whatever they can do, they will do. With Ukraine right now, India is essentially has what is called the people-centric approach, helping with humanitarian aid. With Russia, it is keeping to its traditional relationship with Russia. And we have not seen, visible signs of degradation in that, except that Prime Minister Modi was not able to go to Moscow for a planned summit last year.
Suhasini, thank you very much for that. Suhasini Haider, Diplomatic Affairs Editor at The Hindu, joining us there from Delhi.